I'm Dr. Tracy Stecker, and welcome to the Choosing Help podcast. Choosing Help presents conversations about courage, connection, and the transformative power of asking for support. Through candid discussions, expert insights, and real-world stories, this podcast breaks down stigma and opens doors to understanding. Join our community committed to compassion and courage, because when we choose help, we choose life. Welcome to Choosing Help. I'm Dr. Tracy Stecker, and I'm joined today by Kortney Yasenka, who is a New Hampshire licensed clinical mental health counselor and author of several books on joy and Stoicism. Stoicism is our topic today. And Stoicism is a way of accepting life circumstances and giving you back power over the parts that you have control over. Um, Welcome to the show today. We're glad you're here. Would you mind starting by giving us a good definition of Stoicism, a good example, and then also how you might use it in your practice?
Sure. Thank you, Tracy. Um, I think your definition of stoicism was wonderful, actually, and it was very empowering. I always describe stoicism as, it's a mindset that really encourages people to focus only on what is within your control and letting go of the rest.
Hmm.
And the tricky part is sometimes people have difficulty figuring out what is within their control and what
Right.
isn't. And then it also goes into, living a virtuous life. And that's done through, wisdom, courage, temperance, which is self-control, and justice. And so all of our, decisions, our actions should be based in that type of thinking and that type of reasoning. And it's interesting because I got into Stoicism with my co-author, and I didn't know a ton about it. I wouldn't say I was a, Stoic scholar at the time. But what I realized was I actually was. I just didn't realize that's what, Stoicism was. We kind of have that misconception that being Stoic is, being void of emotion or you have no emotion. But it's truly the opposite. Stoics feel every emotion. They acknowledge it fully. They just don't allow that feeling or emotion to control them.
Yeah.
And with therapy, CBT stems from Stoicism. And
Hmm.
again, I think it's funny because we never learned that in, grad school.
Hmm.
But it's not a new concept by any means. And it really is in every aspect of our life. All these new self-help book comes out and I'll read through them. I'm like, oh, that's Stoicism. They just labeled it, something different.
Hmm.
But I think in the clinical practice, I think, therapists use Stoicism and the Stoic mindset more than they realize.
Hmm.
But it's really helpful to clients because it gives them that power, like you were saying at the beginning, and that autonomy to realize that they have control over their life. They're choosing how to react.
Yes.
With CBT, and I'm sure you do it too, I always tell my clients, a lot of times you don't have control over the situation. You can't change it, but you always have control over how you think and feel about it.
Yeah.
We give them that control, right? Because we always want control over things. It
Yeah.
really decreases their anxiety, their depression, and it changes their outlook on any kind of upcoming obstacle. There's a good quote, Marcus Aurelius, and Ryan Holiday has a book about it, but the obstacle is the way. It was
Hmm.
funny when I first saw it years ago, I was like, oh, do they mean the obstacle in the way? But they definitely do not. Because what Stoicism does, right, it helps us build resilience and have
Hmm.
those coping skills. So when an obstacle is in the way, it becomes the way. So we don't see it as a setback. We say, what can I learn from this? Or I always like to start sentences now with, you know what, this is a great opportunity for me to practice patience or learn whatever it might be. But
Hmm.
you flip it to a more optimistic view. Again, it's not always you're okay with everything or everything is happy and there's no discomfort. It's
Right.
quite the opposite. You sit into that discomfort and then you realize,
Right.
okay, what do I do from here? So it's a lot of, self-reflection too,
Hmm.
and figuring out, what is this emotion trying to communicate with me, and how am I going to react to it?
I love that answer so much and there was so much information in there. If it's okay, I would like to unpack it a little further. I kind of wanted, um, to stop just for a second and make sure that I understood it because there was just so much information provided there. So going back, Stoicism is a way that we can understand what our situation, what's happening with us, and focus on the parts that we can't control. We're going to put those to the side because there's not anything we can do about them. It doesn't mean we aren't disappointed or in pain, but it just means that we're going to take that part and put it to the side for a second. And
Mhm.
then on the other side, we're going to look at the parts that we do have control over. One of those things might be our emotional response to the situation. So what parts do we not have control over? We're going to take that and put it to the side, acknowledging it as still true and important. And then the parts that we're going to focus on are the parts that we do have some control over, including our emotional response, our behaviors, our thoughts, our feelings. All of those are things that we have power over. And so Stoicism is a way of acknowledging which ones we don't have control over, which parts we do, and then making choices within the parts that we do have control over. Did I get that right?
Great. A plus.
Excellent.
And it's also not allowing the emotions to control you,
Right.
right? And Marcus Aurelius said, one of my favorite quotes too is, you have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this and you will find strength.
Yeah.
And again, it's not in a, oh, well, it doesn't matter. What can I do about it? It's not in a defeated way at all.
Hmm.
It's really, what can I focus on? I can't focus, I can't control how people treat me. Um, if I get a raise, if I find a job, if
Hmm.
somebody likes me.
Hmm.
And I think when we realize that, it's empowering, because why do you want to be at the mercy of other people?
Hmm.
Why do you want other people controlling how you feel about yourself?
Hmm.
When I would work with a lot of teenagers, sometimes they'd come in for breakups, and with the teenage brain, it is a very devastating time,
Hmm.
as it should be.
Hmm.
And I always tell them, though, or I ask them, do you really want one person to be in total control of all of your happiness and your
Hmm.
emotions?
Hmm.
And when we realize, okay, I'm in control, and everything I say is much easier said than done. And it's not an easy process, because
Right.
sometimes clients will be like, I don't want to get upset. I don't want to get angry, but it just happens. So
Hmm.
it is, you have to work on it, and it's a practice. But when you truly feel like, I get to determine how I'm going to react, how I'm going to feel about this, and how much it's going to impact me,
Hmm.
then that's like your strength. And that's how you build the resilience. And that's how you bounce back from things and deal with every uncertainty in life.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm thinking of even an example. I do not like technology. I struggle with technology day in and day out. Everything that I do involves technology in some way. So I can't control my universe by avoiding technology. It's in my life, but I can control my emotional reaction to it. Every once in a while, I do seep out a little bit of a curse word or two.
Mhm.
Um, but for the most part, it's embracing it as an opportunity. Okay, I am not comfortable with this. We do not speak the same language. This robot and I do not understand each other. In fact, don't really like each other, but I do control my perception of how to embrace it, my willingness to continue to find ways to make peace with technology. Is that an example?
Yeah. And I think, again, it's to remind yourself that you are choosing to use it. You don't have to. Again, that's going to come with
Right,
consequences, of course,
right,
but it
hmm,
is your choice. So if you
right,
realize, okay, yeah, how do I make the best of this? How do I make it an opportunity, a learning experience? Then
right,
you get something out of it. I was, when clients don't always want to come to therapy, especially
hmm,
younger children sometimes, I'll say, you know what? If you have to be here, let's make it as least horrible as possible for you.
Hmm. Hmm.
Right? So it's like, okay, how do I get something out of this? How can I find a purpose, right? And like meaning in it.
Yeah. So it's the difference of changing the thought to, "Ugh, I have to deal with technology today," to, I don't really like technology, but I'm gonna keep trying.
Hmm.
I get to keep trying to figure out how to make peace with it. And the difference between those two statements is actually enormous. That
Hmm.
I have to feels like you're imprisoned, that somebody is making me do things. But you're right, nobody's making me deal with technology. I could very easily just bounce and not deal with any of it ever. Except
Right.
maybe my phone. That might be.
Right. And you're using one of the virtues of courage. Like I'm going to be, and I know it doesn't take a ton of courage to use technology, but
It
if you're
does.
gonna,
It
yeah,
really does.
is a fear, you're going to act anyway, and you're
Hmm.
going to overcome that. And like we talked about the self-reflection and kind of like an evening reflection, you always ask yourself, what went well today? Where could I improve? Because there's always, progress. We're always looking for, learning more and getting more out of life. And see it as a motivational question, not oh, I didn't do enough today.
Yeah. You did say something too about the virtues of Stoicism. Do you
Mhm.
mind saying those again?
So it's wisdom,
Wisdom,
courage,
courage,
justice,
justice.
and temperance, which is really self-control.
Okay.
So when you make a decision, because
Hmm.
again, you have an example, say you have to decide something. You're not going to make everybody happy. You,
Hmm.
you can't possibly. But if you hold on to these virtues and think, okay, I'm going to act wise, I'm going to have courage to do this, it's just, it's fair,
Hmm.
and there's some balance in it, then you're good with your decision. So regardless of how people respond to it,
Yeah,
you acted in accordance to your own virtues.
right.
And again, it's not dependent on other people's approval or disapproval.
I'm thinking of, as you're speaking, I'm thinking of people I've worked with. I work with a lot of veterans who have been through, who have had traumatic experiences.
Mm,
And I'm thinking of how this could apply to them very well. They might have engaged in or seen something that was just very, very traumatic for them. But if you phrase it in the ways of those four things, their experience, it's almost like the meaning making part of
mm,
trauma work. You expose how they learned, how the wisdom, the courage is obviously there with veterans
mm.
in those circumstances. Um, the temperance is the self-control, just learning even in their traumatic response, what they did, what they had no control over, and then learning some wisdom there. And then I forgot the third one.
Wisdom, courage, justice, temperance.
Justice, yeah, that can be a tricky one in terms of trauma,
Right,
but and in terms of meaning making, but understanding justice, I think is another part that is really important for exploring, like the principle that's exactly what happens. Like this should not have happened.
right.
I can't believe this happened. And so justice is kind of like not, life is unfair. Life is pain. Stoics know this, right?
Hmm.
Life is unfair. Life is pain. Knowing that, what are we going to do anyway? We're never going to get rid of the pain. We're never going to get rid of the unfairness. But what's the next step? We're going to have the courage and the wisdom to keep going. Is
Right.
that right?
Yeah, and it reminds me, so Epictetus has a quote too. It's not the things themselves that disturb people, but their judgment about those things.
Yeah.
So again, changing their mindset around a situation, especially for a veteran,
Yeah.
to realize, yeah, what did they have control over? What didn't they?
Hmm.
And another mention, so Stoics have like a negative visualization, which at first kind of at first glance goes against like everything I thought about with like positive psychology, where you're, thinking about the best case scenario
Hmm.
and, being really positive and when I work with athletes, it's like you're not going to visualize yourself striking out. Like it's only going to be positive things. But the
Hmm.
Stoics do a negative visualization.
Hmm.
And I think it's almost more powerful because it's like, okay, what's the worst that could happen?
Hmm.
Right? And so what?
Yeah.
And then you're prepared. And there's a fine line between like being prepared and kind of like ruminating and over prepared.
Hmm.
Um, but Seneca has one of my favorite quotes. We suffer more in imagination than in reality because our brains are like, we want to know what's going to happen. And we
Right.
want there to be like an answer and a why. And
Yeah.
we have all these what if scenarios. And
Hmm.
sometimes you just have to be like, yeah, okay, what if it happens?
Hmm.
Why are you suffering now
Hmm.
when it may never happen?
Yeah.
So, right, it's not, we know there's a lot of discomfort. And I
Hmm.
think Stoicism does help people who've experienced trauma, and especially veterans, because it's not just saying the world is great and just smile and get over and everything's fine.
Right.
It's really acknowledging that your feelings towards a situation that maybe you didn't have control over. But then it's
Hmm.
also taking responsibility for, okay, what do you have control over now?
Hmm.
And how do we move forward from this?
Yeah, I think a lot of people might tell themselves, if this happened to me, I couldn't survive it. I
Mm,
wouldn't be able to handle that situation. That thought is actually hardly ever true, but we tell ourselves that a lot. And then with veterans I've worked with, they tell themselves the opposite. I know I'll be able to handle this situation. I'm here. This is mission, I'm prepared to handle this situation. And then they get a little bit confused when it was harder than they thought to handle that situation. And so again, it's just going back to our thoughts. We do have control over our thoughts
mhm,
and just, tweaking them a little bit, looking at them more fully
mhm.
and acknowledging the courage and the wisdom in some of the situations that some people have had to endure.
Right. Because again, it's
Yeah.
not always about the outcome. I would say your outlook is different than the outcome.
Hmm.
But I think you're going to feel better about things when you're more confident in your outlook,
Right.
regardless of that outcome.
I um I grew up in the South. And then I spent 10 years up in Vermont. I was at Dartmouth.
Hmm.
And as a Southerner living in the Northeast, I was exposed to a different style of communication. In the South, we are huggy, we are open, excessively open.
Mhm.
We tell you everything about ourselves. We invite you everywhere. It is a lot. There's a lot of emotion, a lot of sharing. When living in Vermont, it was a very different cultural experience for me. They are just I mean, it's the same thing in terms of their openness and their community, but the expression of it is totally different. So it's kind of that stereotypical image of a Stoic.
Mhm.
Going beyond that, though, there are some people, regardless of culture, who have a lot of emotional reactivity.
Mhm.
They don't have to get a lot of information to know that their emotions are high.
Mhm.
How does this approach work with them? What do you do? I mean, because some people naturally are going to gravitate towards this. You give them the situation, you give them their options, you understand the control, not control, and they just very naturally will be able to do this approach. Other people who are maybe more emotionally reactive, it's going to be harder for them to catch on. How do you use this in your practice with them?
Right. So there's a thing called the Stoic pause.
Okay.
And it's where, you have a situation that happens or a stimulus or whatever. And instead of responding quickly,
Hmm.
you take that pause. And you're right,
Hmm.
some people naturally do it. It's funny with your story because I'm also Swedish and my other books are about like Swedish lifestyle. And growing up, it was always like, oh, you're so stoic. The Swedes, never, they're very reserved and not always laughing and bubbly, even though they're extremely happy because they're
Hmm.
content, but that's a whole nother story. But right, it's So some people are just wired, differently.
Mm-hmm.
And it's harder for them to take that pause. But
Mm-hmm.
it can be, with therapy, more people are into like the holistic approach, which is great. And they're doing like breath work and the breathing. And that's where the stoic pause comes in. It's like, okay, you find a trigger, right? You feel your heart beating or your hands are clenched or whatever it might be. Then it's like,
Mm-hmm.
okay, pause, right? Take that deep breath, pause, think about,
Mm-hmm.
okay, and ask yourself, what do I have control over?
Mm-hmm.
What thoughts am I believing? Like you had said too, right? We have a lot of thoughts that they're not all true.
Mm-hmm.
What thoughts am I believing? And okay, how do I want to respond?
Mm-hmm.
And it gives you that intentional pause to think more thoughtfully and thought out about how do I want this, reaction to be interpreted by others? And
Right.
there's always situations that are easier than others to be, stoic. I
Mm-hmm.
always joke that I coach my niece's softball, and I was a big softball player growing up. And it's very hard for me to control some of my emotions or initial like outbursts. But being more stoic, it was like a goal of mine. I'm like, you know what? When people start like yelling, not even yelling at the kids, but just like raising their voice, they kind of look like idiots. Like it's a
Mm-hmm.
town like why are we doing this? So
Mm-hmm.
mindfully, I was like, you know what? If I start feeling this way, I'm going to take a pause. I'm gonna be like, okay, and just kind of move on from it. And again,
Mm-hmm.
we can't control other people. We can't control
Yeah.
the umpire. We can't control the calls that they make. And
Yeah.
that's why I like working with athletes a lot because they have to quickly be like, okay, it's out of my control. I have to move on to the next thing.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I was thinking even just, in any situation, as a scientist, I'm a psychologist and a scientist. I love data.
Mm,
It's just my natural way of interacting with the world. I always want to collect more data. So usually I will assess a situation and then assess a little bit longer because I'm trying to collect more data.
mm,
Other people have a very different belief. They're like, I got the data, in the blink of an eye. Maybe they did, maybe they didn't. I'm not entirely sure. But for me, naturally, I'm always like, let's collect more data. And in a way, that stoic pause is just that. It's
mhm.
collecting data about yourself, really assessing whatever the circumstance was, giving that a moment to just swirl around in there, and also allowing for a moment to go, what did I not get? Maybe I misunderstood something. So it really is important, especially if you happen to be somebody who is emotionally reactive and gets in trouble for some of the things that you might say or do in the heat of the moment. Just give yourself that moment there to pause,
Right.
collect more data, including how can I respond?
Hmm.
What's the best way to respond? Let that seep.
Right. And it's interesting you mentioned, so if you are reactive, right, and
Hmm.
quick to respond, then sometimes that person, like you said, if there was a natural, consequence to it, then blames other people. Well, I did because
Hmm.
they did that to me. Or,
Yeah.
I only reacted that way because they said that.
Hmm.
And that's when you have to be like, okay, I don't have control over what they say or do. I only
Hmm.
have control over myself. But being able to reframe your thinking and having
Hmm.
that self-reflection is very difficult for some people.
Absolutely.
And I did a Stoic leadership conference a while back, and it was for school administration. And one person raised their hand. They said, "Oh, if everybody adopted the Stoic mindset, wouldn't the world be a better place?" And I was like, "Yes, it really truly would be." He goes, "But so why don't people?"
Hmm.
And I said, "Because of that self-reflection, it goes into, are you confident enough to be able to self-reflect?"
Yeah.
And then that goes into, your secure attachment and everything, about yourself. But when you don't have that ability, then you're looking to place blame on other people rather than saying, I take responsibility for this.
Yeah.
And that's okay because you don't have to be perfect.
Right. And you won't be.
Right. Nobody is.
Nope. I feel like I know we're out of time and there was so much that you said that was really valuable. I even had to go back and reiterate some of it. Do you have a place where people can go, including maybe some information about your website or the books that you've written, so they can go and get more information from you?
Yes, thank you. So we can do stoicmoments.com is the website, and then we have a Stoic Moments podcast that
Awesome.
gives very short little daily Stoic advice to help you kind of live a better life.
Do you
And
have a
then
favorite? I'm
my
sorry.
favorite Stoic quote is the happiness of your life depends on the quality of your thoughts. And that's
Perfect.
Marcus Aurelius, because I
Yeah.
feel like that is always in your control and you
Hmm.
determine the quality of your life.
Hmm. Perfect. Thank you so much for being here
Thank you for having
today.
me.
And if anybody wants more information on choosing help, you can always go to our website, choosinghelp.com. Thank you.